and get moving. But great. Well, yep, let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Chris Bednar. I'm president of ARMA New England chapter. And I am thrilled to see Mike Devana back in the fold, so to speak, to talk about records and information management for regulated financial institutions. And I'll pass it off to Colin, our programming director, to introduce Mike a little bit in further detail while I log off and back in under a different name.
So you want me to go now, Chris, or do you have?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm not sharing until the very end.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, cool. Thanks, Chris. It is my pleasure to introduce Michael Devana. Some of you may know Mike is a native of Boston and graduated from Simmons University with a master's in library science. He began his career at the First Church of Christ Scientists in Boston, where I believe you met Meg Duncan, Mike. It could be wrong on that, but that's my recollection.
Meg was my first boss.
There you go. Yeah. So then Mike went on to work at the Bose Corporation and then Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. Mike then took off to Saudi Arabia for a couple of years, working as the records manager for Saudi Aramco. Then came back to the States, still with Aramco in Houston. Then made the journey down to Florida, where Mike continues to reside in the Jacksonville area, where he was the senior records manager for Florida Blue. And Mike is currently the AVP Records Retention Officer at Eversheds in Jacksonville. Mike is also a certified information governance professional and has co-authored several publications through ARMA International. We really wanted to have a session this year focused on financial services industry, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have an expert like Mike talk to us about the regulatory environment, records management challenges within the banking industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks. Hello, old, I shouldn't say that, right? My old chapter. I was there when it was still ARMA Boston, so that's how far back I go. I was what was I? Director of education there for a few years. And I used to have fun going to talk to the records management students over at Simmons. It was always a lot of fun to do panels for them. So
Anthony's Pier 4, right? Anthony's Pier 4.
Pier 4.
Yeah.
LIS 456 with Elliot. What was Elliot's last name? He was records manager at Tufts and then moved. Okay, but I digress. So you just heard most of this. This is the only other thing I wanted to mention was that I thought was funny. If you see the bottom line on the page, last year Peter Kurlich asked me to write down the story of how I moved from the music business and plopped myself into this thing called records management completely by accident. So if you're so inclined, the sordid tale is in the newsletter from ICRM from January. So it's there if you're interested. We're going to cover these things today. Our agenda, we're going to look at banking compared to other industries. And we in banking, we deal with the same suspects that every other business has to deal with. And then we'll talk about some of the elevated responsibilities in the financial industry. Again, depending upon what kind of regulated financial regulator is over you. Did I hear a question? Okay. The one thing that I really like about moving into regulated financial industries is that we've got really two tiers, and we're going to talk about both of these tiers. Two tiers of regulations. One for how you must build the records management program itself. What are the components? What are the minimal requirements? That kind of thing. And then we'll dig a little deeper into that granular stuff that records managers love, keeping record for X number of years or till X trigger happens, those kinds of things. So those would be a little deeper dive into the regulatory environment. Proper disposal and data minimization we'll cover, as well as the challenges of implementing a RIM program in an organization that has never had one before. So talk about some of the ways you might get by the kicking and screaming part of it, as I call it. Once you've got all these building blocks in place, ready, set, go, how to implement this whole thing. And then at the end of this presentation, we're going to go up a level and see how records and information management fits into the overarching governance frame of information governance, and then how we have to keep all those ducks in a row. We'll look at the different modules, the different facets of information governance, and talk about how those work into and support records management. Because as all records managers know, RIM is the most important module in that pie. So we'll talk about that. Okay. If you see me looking over this way, it's because the presentation's up on my big screen. So banking is beholden to the usual federal regulators that we all know and love, right? So whether it's the IRS, Department of Labor with OSHA, the environmental folks, federal aviation, transport, all of those things are involved in banking as well. And then when we look to the bank or the financial industry being regulated, we have to figure out what kind of regulator is in charge, right? And it depends upon the business model. And look down the list here, you'll see you are going to have to be concerned with the Federal Reserve if your example here, state chartered bank is part of the Fed system, a bank holding company, or savings and loan. Those are the pieces. Other folks that are managing records inside financial industries, if you want to disagree or cross swords or whatever, just feel free to jump in. The FDIC, the one that manages and insures, not manages, but insures all of our bank accounts. Those are the regulations that come in here, and it is going to pertain to the state chartered banks that are not members of the Fed system. FINRA, everyone knows, Federal Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Those are looking at the broker-dealer firms. If you're an investment banker, broker-dealer, or you're involved in securities activities, then you're going to be looking over your shoulder at the Security and Exchange Commission. Consumer Federal Protection Bureau for banks and credit unions over $10 billion. Mortgage companies, payday lenders are just a few of the examples I pulled from them. But of course, a lot of Massachusetts people will be familiar with this as the brainchild of Senator Warren. So this is the organization that she helped put together. We come to the Commodities Future Trading Commission. Commodities futures, swap dealers, derivative markets. And then the last one on the page is really the one that I deal with most at EverBank, because EverBank is a national bank, right? So we're headquartered here in Jacksonville. We've got offices up to New York and then out to California. And we've got people working from home from 40 plus states. So we're looking at juggling a whole lot of regulations that pertain both to the banking industry itself, as well as, I mentioned those employees that are scattered to the winds. We look at all the employment laws for all those places as well. So as I mentioned at the top of the page, you cannot escape the Department of Labor and all the unique jurisdictional differences. And if you start playing in California, then it really gets fun. Okay. Pause before I change the page here. Any questions so far? Any disagreements? Anyone want to shake their fist? Okay.
Yeah, nothing in chat.
Okay, good. Thanks, Meg. All right. As I mentioned at the outset here, we're looking at two tiers of regulations that are involved for the financial institutions. And these first ones we're going to talk about on this slide, these are the requirements, the regulations rather, for building the records management program itself. So with the first section, I love that they spelled out that the retention schedule includes all media, because I've had some knockdown dragouts in past lives over just this very question. Does it include electronic? Does it include physical? Like, what is the retention schedule covering? Records managers will usually say, well, it's all information assets, right? All data, information, documents, records. It's media neutral, it's location neutral, it's everything. So that's why I really like this regulation, because I've used it as I've explained this throughout my current position. It's all media. The retention period means the length of time the records must be kept before they are destroyed. Also, this is a good one to have in your back pocket, because it actually, you're looking at, you really do have to delete this stuff at the end of the life cycle. I would say more than just destroyed at the end, because that's only one of three possible dispositions. You could still need to transfer it somewhere. You could still need to permanently archive, depending on the content type. But for the most part, those retention periods on your schedule are going to destroy at the end of life cycle. And I love having that helpfully spelled out for me right in the regulation. Minimum requirements of the retention program itself. Now the list in the regulation is longer than this, so I just picked out my favorites. So you will have this presentation to go, and if you so inclined to Google all of these citations, and you'll see longer lists within these subsections. But these are the ones that I wanted to call out for our presentation today. First bullet, assure that retained records are complete and accurate. This is something that records managers have been banging on about forever. Complete, they've got to have integrity. Accurate, right? The record has to be able to be proven to be what it purports to be. And so we've always taken accuracy, authenticity and integrity as these are must-haves. And that's why I interpret it this way as I look at this regulation. Couldn't be more clear. Assigning the authorities and the responsibilities for records retention for the employees. We do this throughout the bank I'm currently at. We have different roles, whether to end users, whether to department record controllers, whether to a line of business managers, and then all throughout the different components of the compliance organization, which is where I sit. I'm under the Chief Compliance Officer, and we report into the Chief Risk Officer. So those are good folks to have along for the ride. And we spell all of these requirements out. Policies and procedures must include all of that stuff for legal holds. And the records retention schedule must be accurate, current, and comprehensive. Love that. It's everything, everywhere. The only thing that I kind of wrestled with here is when I'm saying comprehensive, can you build out a very granular retention schedule, or is it okay to big bucket it into, as few buckets as you can? And I chose the latter. I always build out big bucket retention schedules. And then within those buckets, I listed a very granular level, the kinds of content types that fit within the bucket. So I think I'm within the bounds of saying comprehensive on the retention schedule. You, of course, have to tie into your backup and recovery. That's very important. In the last bullet here in the middle section, provide for the proper disposition of records. Here, you actually have to do it. You can't just say we have a policy, we have a procedure, we have a retention schedule. No, here you actually have to provide for the proper disposition of the records. And you can get lawyers to argue all day long about what proper disposition is, but records managers know it's looking at the retention schedule and following it consistently. The last piece I'll touch on here is the communication for your records program. I won't read through all this, but what we do at Everbank is essentially everyone, meaning all new associates, all new contract workers, must pass a records management training course on the way in the door. Then it is assigned again annually as part of your compliance refresher. And then in the second bullet, they provide for the dissemination of what's going on with your policies and procedures. We get all of our department record controllers together quarterly, and any changes I've made in policy, procedures, retention schedule, etc., we spell those out in detail to the department record controllers, and then they take that downhill and work with their various business lines and records owners. More here to draw upon. I love this first section, 1236. My eyes are a little blurry, sorry. 1236 appendix, number 3, and I put in italics the part I really like. Your records program has to have the personnel that are appropriately trained and competent to oversee the records management program, the records management plan. So really looking for credentialed people, whether you're an ICRM credentialed, whether you're AIM credentialed or ARMA convention, whatever that is, you've got to show that full understanding. And when we deal with records coordinators and anybody else we're going to be in touch with as a liaison from the corporate office to whether it's a branch bank or one of the other satellite offices across the company, we always try and make sure, don't just drop this on the side of some junior associate's desk. We need somebody that really understands the concepts. So qualified. Number 4, oversight from the board of directors. Love that. Conducting an approval of your retention program and your schedule at least once every 2 years. So there it is. You can say this has got to be reviewed by the board and approved by the board every 2 years. Each regulated entity has to comply with all the laws and the regulations, including the advisory bulletins that are put out by your chief regulators. And I'll touch on that at the bottom of the page.
Hey, Mike.
Sir.
Before we go on, 2 questions in the chat, one from me and one from Zuli. Mine from the agencies you listed in the previous slide or 2 slides ago, do any of them actually provide retention periods?
Yes. Yes.
So you can't go there and find spots in there to add to your schedule directly from their sites?
Right here, we're going to see on the next slide coming up. This is when we get into the granular stuff of how do we know how long to keep stuff?
Okay,
we'll
great.
get into that. Okay.
Great. And then a question from Zuli, can you elaborate on providing for backup and recovery for electronic records?
And is that from a RIM, information management, or records management perspective?
I always include what I term all information assets, right? Because it's data as far as the backup goes. Not all data is records.
Correct.
Where we get that, and the thing that I really try to impress upon folks when I go into IT, when I go into the network backup teams, is we've got to differentiate between true production backup. If the system goes down tonight, what are you going to restore it with tomorrow?
Yep.
Versus long-term offline storage, right? You don't want to keep 10 years of production data in your Oracle system. So at some point, in order to avoid, system degradation and all those things, you're going to be moving it offline and keeping it in some kind of alternate storage where you're not trying to maintain the production system with 10 years worth of data. So I always am clear to differentiate those two, so that when the system is going to go down and you're looking at the RTO and we want everything back in line. And we also want, and I'll touch a little a little bit further down the road here. The concept of vital records is still not gone. And so when you have business critical records, try to align those with your tier 1 storage. All right, so the first thing that comes up is the things you really are considering to be mission critical versus, well, we just want to get the email back, because that's great, but where are your vital records? Okay, so here in the middle here, this 12 CFR 30, the Appendix B, this is the first place where I go to tie in records management with the requirements of our information security group. Because if you don't have that overarching information governance, oftentimes you know how those silos develop, and one group runs off and they kind of do their own thing and kind of act independently of the other silos. But here we want to tie in the information security standards, and we do that by noting that the proper disposal of both customer and consumer information, right? You should not be over retaining that. And the privacy laws are only getting it thicker. Right? So you want to make sure you're properly disposing of that. However, because so many groups that are involved in the big data silo world and the data governance folks who want to keep everything forever, okay, you can do that if, and here we can pull it right out of the regulation, blind, or that's the term the regulation used, but internally, Everbank, we will say anonymized, we'll say pseudonymized, obscured somehow. We have different ways to do that. But we want to make sure that the PI elements are not over retained, and the remaining data elements can be kept for, whether you're doing business modeling or credit scoring or any of those things that people like to keep a lot of data for long term. That's really going to be a good thing to get across. It's fine to keep it for 20 years, 30 years if you really think you need to, but we got to do it the right way. So we work in tandem with our data governance groups to develop the processes and procedures to make sure that data is appropriately scrubbed before it's flowed on down to the data lake. We want to keep the PI out of the data lake. And then the last thing I mentioned here on this page was, I mentioned above about needing to follow the advisory bulletins, and this one applies to us directly because it comes from the OCC. Records destruction and disposition should generally occur only in accordance with systematic and well-documented procedure and an approved record retention disposition schedule. Same thing records managers have been banging on about forever. Systematic, well-documented. We always say legally defensible. All right, you've got to show consistency in how your organization is implementing the program, as to how you're auditing the program, as to how you're governing everything. It's got to be systematic. You want to have documentation for all of that. Of course, in accord with your handy dandy records retention and disposition schedule. So there, if you need it, is help from the OCC. And as Chris mentioned right here, how long do you keep all this stuff? These are just a very few examples. I use Sazio Versatile, by the way, to do a lot of the research here. So I use that. I have thousands of different regulations that go into building the retention schedule. But from banking at a very high, very generic level, these are the ones that stand out to most people, and that we use these inside of building policies. Authority applies to the policy because of, here we look at a very common high-level banking 31.1010.410. Whole lot of stuff is listed in that regulation if you want to go and gander and Google it for yourself. But right there, not to exceed 5 years. You can do that. If you're a NACHA organization, meaning if you're a participating, what's the whole term? Participating depository financial institution. We always use 7 years when we deal with anything that's going through NACHA, because we don't want to parse between 6 and 7 years. We're keeping it at that big bucket level. So if NACHA applies, plow right over the 6, but there's the requirement if you want to see it. And then we defer to the higher level 7. The next one here, this 31-501-601. This is new as of last year. The Office of Foreign Asset Control changed this last March. So March of 2025, any transactions, disclosures, et cetera, that come under the Office of Foreign Asset Control, your retention period was just bumped from 5 years up to 10 years. And if you're dealing with records of blocked property, like property that was blocked through OFAC, that 10-year retention period doesn't start until the block is lifted. So it's a slight difference there. So where do we get all those requirements to say, what do we have to do when people open an account? They come right out of the old Patriot Act. It's been around a long time. Certain records need to be kept for 5 years until after the account termination. Think of all your customer due diligence. And in other records, we can retain only for 5 years from the create date. Very different. We do keep that differential on our retention schedule because we have so many of both. It made sense to split the record code there. Questions before I turn? Got to be fast. Okay. Now, here's how we tie records management. Previous page, we looked at tying it into security. Here's how we tie it in with privacy. So Regulation P is all about regulating personal financial data. This, again, as I mentioned, under the OCC, retention of that blind data, it's not customer PI. So you can keep it from now until doomsday. You're fine as long as you've stripped out those elements of PI. And you can use that blind data if you're going to aggregate information, right? Flow it into the data lake. If you're trying to figure out credit scores, consumer reports, those you're okay. But the blind data, such as payment history and accounts, that is not personally identifiable. So those are the kinds of things that banks look at when they're developing their credit scores. Did you pay? Did you not pay? And so those data can be kept even after the PI is stripped away. Continuing here with Regulation P, same thing. This is what I work with our privacy officers. Lists of names and addresses, that is not PI. It doesn't include that. Information that does not identify a consumer, such as that aggregate information. We talked about stripping it out to moving everything down into the data lake. That is aggregate information, and it should be blind, and it can't contain personal identifiers. Right? We have to take out all the account numbers, the names, addresses, et cetera, et cetera. And then I left here at the end, what if you're a regulated financial institution that's non-banking? All right, I use the examples here of insurance companies, mortgage brokers, even a pawn shop. Difference being, you can go there and get money, but you're not making a deposit with the pawn shop. So it's not these are not depository institutions. So what do we do there? You'll see we've now switched from 12 CFR, now we're at 16 CFR. This is the Federal Trade Commission. And so they are going to oversee these non-depository financial institutions. The first bullet point I love because this one's worth reading in full. In the development, and you're maintaining procedures for the secure disposal of customer information in any format, no later than 2 years after the last date the information is used in connection with a provision, product or services, unless it's necessary for blah, blah, and it goes into a whole lot of exceptions. So I use this to really encourage retention take place, even if it's long-term retention, right? You'll see IT departments that have kept everything forever, right? This is a good thing to mention. Actually, these things are supposed to be dispositioned no more than 2 years after the basic reason that you collected it has gone away. Now, so what are some of those exceptions that you can keep it? Well, we've got a retention schedule, and the retention schedule requires us to keep it for 10 years. And so then the 2-year clock wouldn't actually start until the retention period or the contractual period is gone, is terminated. So that's a good one to know about. And I love that the Federal Trade Commission encourages people to periodically review your data retention policies to minimize unnecessary retention of data. And the whole principle of data minimization is both input as well as retention, right? So don't collect more data than you need to. And then at the other end of the retention life cycle, don't keep it longer than you need to. That way you're able to start right-sizing your information footprint, keeping only what's legally required.
Mike, I think, Zulia, do you have another question?
I was just intrigued with 12 CFR 30B and on both 1030 and 1016. So with the data lake, right, and with as much information that is coming into the data lake currently, right, we've got information from all sorts of places. And with AI, there is no subcategory, because I would be afraid to even allow blind data, right? Because one way or another, they might be able to connect the two, where it's just amounts and this, that, the other. Like, I'm just worried about the bad actor, but there's no subcategory saying, if there's any way of connecting the two data points, it would be allowed or would not be allowed. You know what
The blind data would be allowed, but think about how you're scrubbing that data, right?
Okay.
So if you're obscuring it, you can unobscure it. If you pseudonymize it, you can rebuild it also. If you anonymize it, stripping everything out, then you cannot. You can't recover it after it's been anonymized versus pseudonymized or obscured or masked or whatever, whatever
Data mask,
way your data governance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So go down to data governance and start swinging a stick and see what you can get done.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, though. That was great. Did I go through that? Yeah, we went through all of those. Okay. Now you know all the regulations and policies and everything you need to build your retention schedule, build your records program itself, and put all those governance blocks and how also you're going to tie it to privacy and security. All those regulations are right there for you to use if you're in the world of regulated finance. So what do we do next? How do we get the rocket off the ground if businesses have not done this before? If you're not, I'm going to mention it really on the second bullet. How do you overcome the inertia? So one thing that I always try to impart when I go into an organization, and this is not, these next few slides, these are not limited to financial. These are looking at the broad range of organizations I've worked at over the years, whether it's healthcare, oil and gas, electric. I mean, there's places, other places other than banking that have never even dreamed about. Nobody knows what records management is. That it can be that bad. And things might not change until bad things happen and there's a judge wagging their finger in your ear. So imparting to the management, information is a corporate asset, and the C-level gets that. They know how to manage assets, and they wouldn't dream of not managing their investments or their property or their people or anything else. So imparting that, here's, other than your people, information is the most valuable thing any company has. So start considering it as a corporate asset. You have to overcome the inertia. And again, as I put, at rest or in motion, whatever's been going on or not, you got to change it in increments, right? No sudden moves, unless the court order says so. That's happened to companies too, where they've not had anything and something bad happens and you've got to put all the wheels in motion right away. But if you're not under the the hammer of the judge. Try to move in increments. No sudden moves scare people away. You will, no matter where you go, no matter what company you work for, no matter what industry you're in, you are going to run into the politics and the little fiefdoms. And some of the information governance modules may be hidden off inside some of these little fiefdoms and factions. Okay. Present to those folks the idea of being these RIM principles being consistently applied, right? And it can seem like a threat to them if certain groups have been used to running their own show, but showing how you can benefit them. If all the gears are meshed and things aren't retaining the silos and the fiefdoms, make sure that the integration of those information governance modules will make everybody's life better. So show them you mean no harm. Also use that to break down the silos. The last bullet here on this top section, the RIM constraints, get used to it. That's the way it is. RIM is the perennially and forevermore under-resourced, under-budgeted, understaffed function anywhere. So that's why I say you got to get creative, and that's the way it is. And if you read my musician story from January in the newsletter, you'll see how I tied in being a creative musician and using that creative outlet outside of music once I left the music business, and now taking that same creative force and moving it into records management. So you can get creative. Here's how I educate, advocate, and little elevator pitches. I've heard people say, you need to develop an elevator pitch. I don't do something as formal as memorizing a paragraph. I think it comes off a little too stiff, scripted. But depending upon the audience, these things that I've listed here, this is what I'm trying to keep in mind dependent upon the audience. So if I'm talking to senior management, they want to know about mitigating risk, compliance, reducing costs for storage, cyber insurance and premiums, becoming SOC 2 compliant. All these things here that are going to prick up the ears of senior managers because this is in their realm. If you took this list of items here and went and talked to the average end user about it, you'd get a yawn. It's not important to them. So like any communication 101, know your audience. If you're talking to middle management, you really do want to talk about increasing worker efficiency. I've heard some people scream at this that it's not true. I will fight them. This very much increases workers' efficiency when people have no official repository to put their records, no version control, no naming conventions, no formalized file structures. Nobody can find anything. And if you develop those things in line with information management or records management, or where it all comes from, library science, if you get that consistent metadata going, you're really starting to chug and you'll have much more successful in worker efficiency. And that's why it leaded to happier audit results. Because when I work with internal audit and we talk about what's going on with various lines of business, we talk about how do we improve that. And so if I've worked with the department record controller and the various record owners within a department, and then involve the department's senior management, you can get the support to do this because nobody wants to wind up as an agenda item for the audit committee, right? So they want to buy that. So results are happier for both internal and external audits, and that really brings you quantifiable results. Records coordinators, I have a whole team of them all across the bank. They're from coast to coast. But these duties as records coordinator, this is not part of their job description, right? This is not anything that's officially recognized by HR. This is other duties as assigned. So when I work with them and train them up to be good record coordinators, I always push the idea of being proactive, right? Be the leader, because the leaders get noticed. Everybody knows when an employee is not afraid to take on something and to run with it. That's the kind of employee you can count on. So those are some of the background software that I'm looking for when I'm looking for a good records coordinator. And the end users, all they're looking for, where do I put my stuff? How do I find my stuff? If you can solve for that, end users will love you. They'll drag things into folders, depending upon how much metadata is automated versus how much you're asking them to key in. That can have a difference. But really, if you can solve for them, where do I put my stuff? How do I find my stuff? End users will be delighted. Now you've got all those building blocks in place. Got to draw on the line in the sand, right? You can't go back and boil the ocean and clean up 100 years of legacy data. So devise all those rules to go day forward and make sure that they apply across the whole universe, structured data, unstructured data, all the data that's stored with your vendors, and apply it across the physical and the records. How do you clean up the past? You do high-level analysis. If you go into, for example, a department that the longest retention period that they could possibly have is 10 years, you don't have to go opening 1,000 folders and documents and boxes. Cut it off at 10 years, as long as you're looking for, I have examples here of active records, if it's a department that has a lot of contracts, benefits, that kind of thing. Otherwise, untangling the spaghetti is just not worth it, nor is going off to your storage vendor and popping the lids on a gazillion boxes. Not needed. So take your rules, clean up the past with high-level analysis. You'll be in good stead. Always checking, of course, for things under a legal hold, making sure all media, all locations as you clean up your stuff. Now delete or shred what is eligible. And that's where, especially if you have the inertia of inaction, this is where the hand-holding and the soothing tones may be required, because you could see some real hyperventilating, because a lot of the records owners, if they've not had RIM before, they're of that mindset. You'll see the arms go, these are my records, right? Don't touch my records. And they're not your records, because if you left here today, they wouldn't be going with you, all right? And that's how you can help them get through. We're just managing information like any other corporate owned asset. Information assets are no different, but it can take some hand-holding to get through that process. So at the end, implementing your data minimization principles, retain only what's legally required, because the regular disposition of information assets should be the rule. All these things we've talked about should become your regular business as usual, routine business, Your Honor. So if the judge ever does ask you, you wanted to be able to say that consistently applying the RIM and IG principles, it's routine. Brings us back to what records managers have always known: be legally defensible. Now I'm going to rush through these next two because I know Chris needs time at the end to do his thing. Okay, Chris, if you want to throw the flag on the play there, you just let me know and we'll go from there.
No, we're good, Mike. Keep going.
So now we're going to take records management and fit it up into the overarching umbrella I call the big top of information governance. This is the highest level of managing information in any organization other than the actual corporate management itself. Think of the mission statements and the objectives and all that stuff that comes down from the C-level. But as you're constructing your information governance program or your records management program, show management how all of this stuff that we're looking at here fits into the corporate management objectives and mission statement. That's a really good illustration to bring them, because they will appreciate to see all of this that you're proposing. It's not just, the records manager has got a bug in his or her ear here, right? So no, this is how it ties into our corporate mission, our organization's mission. Okay. So the Uber governance paradigm is for all information assets, as we've talked about. And then I put records management next because to my mind, it's the most important. Others may differ, but to records management, because it's been around so long and it's been such a staple and such a foundational piece of information governance, it really is the backbone of how all of these information governance modules are structured and fit together. So I put it up top. But now we'll go in alphabetical order to talk about some of those modules from a very high level. So think information governance, the big wheel. We've seen the big wheel model, whether from the EDRM, the e-discovery wheel or the information governance wheel, those kinds of things. Here's how the spokes fit into that wheel. And again, people can disagree that more or less of these spokes are needed, but these are the groups that I work with when I'm trying to implement information governance, again, at that overarching level. Archives is very important. That's where all of your permanent stuff goes. Again, it's going to be less than 10% of everything in the corporation, but make sure, of course, you have collections policy and all the rest to make sure that people aren't trying to slide garbage into the archive. Because if you don't have specific descriptions and limitations upon what can go into the archive, you will get the contents of somebody's drawer, and somebody will say, well, I worked on it, so it's got to be retained forever. So clear delineation of the following criteria must be met to meet it up into the lofty archives. Artificial intelligence, we're all getting used to. The things that I just want to point out here and make sure that your retention policies and your AI standards, et cetera, address these. You've got different kinds of AI doing different things. So if you're auto-categorizing, very short retention. Same with the generative AI. Think of this as like if you're setting up Copilot, you've got to put a ceiling. These prompts and responses can be kept no longer than. Put that ceiling over your generative, I warned you, generative AI prompts and responses. I put the 3-year limit on ours. It's like an email. It may not be a record. It most likely is not a record. But in any case, if a prompt and response does become a record, it's going to fall into the category of general business records. So we put that 3-year ceiling on it. The last artificial intelligence, agentic AI. When the black box starts making decisions on behalf of your organization, you've got to retain, as we've known, for any other record, what's the chain of custody, what went into this. You've got to have the reasoning card. You've got to retain the algorithm. What are the criteria that went into building? You can't just say, well, AI picked the vendor or AI picked the candidate, because if there's pushback from any of those, you've got to be able to prove why the decision was made. You can't just say, I don't know, AI did it. And agentic AI needs to be retained very, very differently than the other types. We've talked about the BCDR. Try to align those vital records to your tier 1 systems. Big data we've talked about, all that aggregation. Keep that PI out of the lake. Business change management, hugely important when you're getting into implementation of a big program, because people need to know to plan, make your communications to that group. We all remember, who moved my cheese. You got to tell people the cheese is about to move, because you don't want those awkward surprises. I know we've all been in companies where you come in on Monday and you find out what IT did over the weekend, and then, but in a huge change like implementing any of these programs or information governance overall, make sure your project management teams are involved to plan out the business change. Compliance, hugely important. Again, that's where I'm reporting up through compliance into risk. But the job of compliance is really to protect the world from the company, right? So the company doesn't do things it's not supposed to. You got to throw the flag, hold up the red card, do what it takes to do, but don't let the company do things that are going to affect the world. Then data governance, data management. You'll often see these two together. Again, different people have different opinions, and there may be some out there screaming it's the same thing. The reason I make the differentiation is because data governance I see as who's putting all those policies and procedures together, who's maintaining the rules of the superhighway, versus data management, where now you've got to put all those rules into action. Now you've got people that are going to be maintaining your data maps. You're going to have liaisons throughout all your lines of business in the form of data stewards. And all that is going to help you to arrive at the data quality, which is the very purpose for data governance existing. So I separate out these two. Others may disagree. That's fine. Digital asset management. All of these digital assets like your images, videos, commercials, any other IP management that needs to take place. You know, we rented out or we leased out, you know, a licensed image to be used 10 times in 3 different ways. A digital asset management system can help you track the uses of that IP while it's leased out to someone, under contract to someone. And all of that needs to tie into overarching, whether it's you have a real content management system. People think, or I think anyway, of companies like OpenText or EMC, you know, that have that full suite of information governance modules versus, you know, the next implementation of SharePoint or M365. You're not going to be able to do things like, or very easily, I should say, set up things like event-based triggering or subject filing, those kinds of things. So that's why a lot of businesses stick with their standalone data asset management system, because it's not going to integrate with a lot of other things. E-discovery we all know about and we all harp about every day. The Enterprise Project Management Office, I always make sure records management information governance is at the table with the EPMO as they develop product, whether it's charters or project plans. And this is really about when companies are acquiring other companies. If you're merging, you're going to get a whole lot of data and a whole lot of records that come with that merger, and making sure that you clean out the rot before it gets imported to your organization will be an important part of what RIM does and advises the project management team, right? Keep the rot out. Don't migrate it in, and don't send us 100,000 boxes from your storage vendor. We don't want them. Information technology, we all know the different components of IT, the infrastructure, the applications, etc. And IT oftentimes, at least at my org, has a separate IT project management office. So I work with them when either a new system is coming in, you know, you're doing a migration, you're doing an upgrade, a new platform, a new vendor is coming in. We work with the project team to make sure that RIM is considered both upfront at the time the vendor is considered and being contracted, and we're doing, you know, like the business needs assessment. Can the vendor do certain things? Can the new system do certain things to make sure that you don't set the thing up and get it running, and then you go down there with your RIM requirements and then they say, well, we can't do that. That's what you want to avoid. And here is our last page. These are the other ducks in a row that are coming up. I try to make sure these all fit together. We've talked about information security. They are guarding the castle wall, and we always differentiate between security and privacy. You hear those terms used synonymously, but they're not, completely different functions. So think about protecting the castle wall from the threats getting in and the wrong kind of information getting out due to bad actors or whatever. Internal audit can be a really good friend, especially if you've got a good functioning RIM program, because you can guide them, you can guide audit through what should we be looking for, not just the old kind of do you have a policy? Do you have a retention schedule? You know, check. Okay, how are these being implemented? And internal audit can help you with that. Knowledge management, you don't see a lot, but it's very important to gather corporate knowledge. I saw a great example of that this morning. It was a briefing at the Pentagon, and one of the reporters asked the general, how do you make sure you capture all your lessons learned? How do you know, that kind of a thing? And the general very passionately without using the word knowledge management, launched into what they do. And it was spot on knowledge management. So I thought that was great. And they capture all those and it becomes part of the official Pentagon records. Legal department,
Mike,
flip side. Yes.
we're at 3 minutes, so I want to make sure that we get through all this in the next 2 if we can.
You will have this in one. How's that?
All right, great.
Okay. Legal department protects the company from the world. Again, a different perspective from what compliance is doing. Now the department is protecting the company from the outside. Lines of business must be involved in everything you do. Network backup, we've discussed. Offsite physical, everybody knows about that, but please make sure it's a certified privacy risk management. Risk management's huge. Make sure you're full disclosure. The risk deciders, the risk appetite deciders will decide whether the risk appetite is there or not, but make sure you as the records manager or information governance professional provide that full disclosure to the people that need to make the decision. If you see it as a red flag and they do not, you have done your duty. You fully disclosed. The rest of these I'm going to leave. You'll have this slide deck to go ahead and peruse through. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, here it is. Chris, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Anybody have any questions for Mike before I just want to share one slide, but while I do that, please either come off mute or type into the chat if you have any questions.
I just want to say thank you to Mike. I think this was absolutely fantastic. Making it all that much more amazing. I know you're feeling under the weather, so I don't think anyone noticed. You did an awesome job. Thank you, Mike.
You can't see how I'm struggling right now to get my screen. My screen. Are you able to share, Chris? It looks like I'm still sharing. Oh, there we go.
No, I am not yet. I haven't found my slide. Let me see if I can find it.
I'm so impressed. I felt myself going sideways for a little bit, but I said, sit up and you can do this. So
Yeah, you couldn't tell. You were feeling that.
Okay.
Yep, found it and I was able to share it. So I just wanted to let everybody know of some upcoming programs and events that we have going on with ARMA New England. Tomorrow, a few of us will be at the New England Archivists Conference up in Portland, Maine, at their records management roundtable, talking about records management with our archive folks. April 4th, we're going to be volunteering at the Greater Boston Food Bank. If you're interested, please see our website to sign up. And also, please save the date, September 25th, for our all-day conference, Empower 2026, which this year will be in Providence, Rhode Island. Mike, thanks very much again. We'll get slides out to those who attended and a link to the video as well. Appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, well, it was great to see the old gang. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Feel better.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.